Good evening, everybody. My name is Galav Rano, and I have an interesting book here with me today. It's called Emotional Alchemy by Tara Bennett-Goleman. How the Mind Can Heal the Heart. So there was an interesting piece that I had read over the weekend I wanted to share, and perhaps let it lead into a song that I wrote called Out of the Blue. So I want to read from the book, chapter 12, under Mindful Therapy. Title is You Don't Have to Believe Your Thoughts. So it says, when I was a child, my grandmother had a wondrous old oriental cabinet in the living room. On its front there were carved a painted tableau of a woman in a kimono carrying a parasol as she walked down a path from a pagoda. Gazing down on her from a distance was a bearded kimono-clad man in the window of what looked like a tea house. The scene was an alluring glimpse into an exotic landscape. Everything in that scene was fascinating. The buildings, the people, their clothes, the gnarled trunks of the trees, the huge flowers. As a young girl, I daydreamed about the scenes for hours. As a young girl, I daydreamed about the scene for hours, and it remains a pleasant, vivid memory of visits to my grandmother's house. I've wondered if that cabinet was the seat of my journeys in life. The trips I've made to Asia, becoming a student of Japanese tea ceremony, flower arranging, Indian dance, and Asian spiritual practices. When my grandmother died, my mother, knowing how much I loved the cabinet, suggested to other family members that it be given to me. But others decided that my grandmother's furniture should be sold and that the proceeds should go into the estate. The cabinet had been just one of many pieces of furniture in her estate. But once I expressed an interest in it, the cabinet took on a special mystique. A relative who hadn't paid any attention to it until they suddenly became convinced it was extremely valuable. So he arranged to have a certified appraiser examine the cabinet and determine its value, which I would pay to the estate. A couple of family members anticipated its worth would be great, an essential asset of the estate. As some relatives talked, the price ballooned. A fine old Asian antique like that could be worth $100,000 or more. Finally came a day when the appraiser looked at the cabinet. Her conclusion: the cabinet was not from Asia at all, but an American imitation, Japanesserie, as it's called, and not very old. Besides, she pointed out the painting was chipped, and the veneer had began to flake off. Her assessment: it might be worth $300 at most. My family's heated, overblown view of that humble cabinet was much like the distorted thinking typical of schemas. It's so easy to see something the way our wishes would have it be, and then convince ourselves that our assumptions are the truth. What we lack is the corrective reality that the appraiser brought to bear. The power of schemas to impose their reality on our perception, to recreate our world on their own terms, has a basis in brain function. The amygdala, the center for emotion, sends long branches into most parts of the neocortex, the area where signals from the senses are analyzed for their meaning. When the amygdala is hot, for instance during a schema attack, these branches also become more active, influencing how the neocortex analyzes what we perceive, how we interpret what we see or hear, and how we think. This can distort how the brain interprets what we see, shifting the likelihood that an emotionally loaded interpretation rather than a realistic one will be applied. When the amygdala amygdala. I've been pronouncing it wrong. Sorry. The amygdala. When the amygdala heats up with intense activity, emotionally loaded thoughts loom larger in our field of attention. This would explain how our schema shapes so powerfully the way things seem, almost as they cast a spell over us. Tibetan Buddhism speaks of such distorted thoughts as cognitive obstructions, powerful variety of mental affliction and a basic cause of psychological suffering. Fortunately, even if we can't control the circumstances that lead to such thoughts, we have the ability to free our minds from their hold. So this book is a spiritual book in nature, and she's discussed a couple times how there's something called schemas. It's a way of normal thinking and feeling that we tend to slip into. Just an interesting thought that I had from this whole thing is that it's really true. Just because our mind tells us something, be it negative or positive, it can be totally faulty. And especially when if we know it's going to be counterproductive, it's definitely a way of, she talks about trying to have empathy for the schema but not acting exactly how it would have us do. Because we have the ability to know it's not true just because we got excited over it. Okay, with that I want to play a song called Out of the Blue. Woke up with a shock. She saw the image of her father on the TV. He said, Pvt Atias has been stabbed. She dragged herself to the telephone and called her mother, related the story that her father was stabbed to death on a bus while he slept. The man responsible was a 16-year-old boy who was angry that his folks could not cross the West Bank barrier. She burst into tears and went to read the news online. Said the man was arrested and taken by Shin Bet Security Services. The paper claims the attack to be a result of Israel's policy on prisoner release. This is not enough for her. She can't get her senses in order. She kicks and screams, hoping for revenge. Two man's blood was splattered against the front of the shop. All his hopes and dreams fell spilled onto a bus filled with bystanders that heard his scream. Only a few weeks after enlisting to serve his country, a knife gets stabbed into his neck and unprovided to take away his life. He wore his uniform with honor while a teenager committed an act of cowardice. At night he still wakes up and sees his tombstone, and he says, who will make my sleeping murder known?